I'm Aria Schwartz along with Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. The New York Liberty. What's their roster situation, and what situations are they facing? Let's dive in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. Download the episode, makes our stats look better, and allows us to continue doing this important work. You want to sponsor an episode of the Winsidr Show? Email us, info@winsidr.com. All right, Rachel. New York Liberty, a.k.a. Dallas Wings 2.0, a.k.a. mind-boggling, a.k.a. headache because I'm going to have to do a lot of math here. Let's just quickly run down all the names. Let me get a sip of water first because it's a lot of names. Let me run down all the names currently on roster, and then the 2 players, maybe 3 players who are not currently on roster who definitely need our eyes because they are going to be impactful in this free agency period. 1 second while I sip. Okay. Natasha Howard, Benai Shalani, Sammy Wickham, Sabrina Ionescu, Asia Durr, Jasmine Jones, Jocelyn Willoughby, Michaela Unyanwere, Leanna Odom, Kylie Shook, Dee Richards, Han Su. And now the players not on roster that we got to pay attention to are Rebecca Allen and Marine Johannes, or you could also argue Niall Raincock Ekunwe as another player. Unfortunately, I would say that it's going to be a tough spot for Rashonda Gray and Paris Key, but let's not talk about that in that simulation, whatever. Very similar to the Wings, this is a tough spot. With so much young talent with just not enough minutes or roster spots, it's a tricky one. Now they have less than 200K left in the cap space, and realistically, that's enough money to bring back Becca Allen or Marine Johannes, who are not currently on roster, but it's a tough spot because similar to what we were talking about with the Wings, but trickier, is that they, to bring back one of these 2 players, will have to move on from one of these young talents. Now, realistically, if I'm Jonathan Kobe, I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, I'm listing these players of who I like, young players on rookie scale contracts, and I'm trying to trade them off for a draft pick in future years. You don't want to get an immediate return on this because they don't have the space for it. Side note, that's a positive for other teams who are well aware of this because they're not going to want to give much. Maybe a second round pick, that would be a lot, honestly. Maybe a third round pick in a coming season because New York's back is against the wall if they want to keep these players. They got to make it and move it. They got to shake and bake. And they, you look at these players, you got to think Asia Durr coming back. You don't really know what the situation is. Even if you wanted to get rid of her, even like play style wise, she's exactly what this team is missing. But that said, you don't know what you're getting back when she comes in, right? Michaela Onyenwere coming off Rookie of the Year, you're not moving her. Dee Richards has cemented herself a spot on this team. So you got to look at some of these other young players like Liana Odom, Kylie Shook, Jocelyn Willoughby, and Jasmine Jones as, okay, which one of these could we see moving? Now, Jocelyn Willoughby, I think play-wise has shown that this team is invested in her. So I would say that she's kind of bottom of that list of who we would move. Jasmine Jones is a player who I'm super hyped on, just athletic ability-wise. I know there's a lot of teams that will be jumping at the chance to get her
I agree.
For a penny. Kylie Shook's an interesting one because I see her and Mercedes Russell as 2 players. Why am I bringing up Mercedes Russell? If you know, New York Liberty got her, cut her. She moves on to sign then with Seattle and has had a great career over the past little bit. But the reason it's so interesting is they both have a body type that you don't see often in this league. And if they can progress and grow to the potential that many people have expectations of, there's someone you don't want to drop. So in my mind, with Mercedes Russell being so recent, if I'm the GM, if I'm Kobe, I'm not moving Shook that soon. I would like to keep her, especially considering the fact that the only reason you would want to move her is not for, a Marine or a Rebecca Allen. You would want to move her for, one of the big
I
names
agree.
in free agency or something, like a big,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, and Cole talked about that in Sandy Brandella's press conference about, hey, we're going to explore free agency. We're going to go out there and we're going to have conversations and we're going to see. I mean, you have to see what you could potentially attract. And, you know, there's some big names out there. You just never know. And in New York, I mean, that's a place people want to be right now. So, I think as much as it's interesting, as much as I look at this as Dallas Wings 2.0, yes, you have some question marks with this roster. Yes, you have a lot of young talent. Yes, you've got a whole army of people on this roster. And honestly, last year with Howard being out and Asia Durr coming back, like you're just not 100% sure what this all looks like still together. So you've got some really good pieces. You've got a lot of promising pieces. Knock on wood, everyone's healthy and can come back healthy, and Sandy Brondello can take the reins and just kind of, we can see what she can do with that. But I think if you're Kolb, you're looking out in free agency and saying, hey, can we attract a high level big, someone along those lines? And then at that point, yes, that's where you cut ties with maybe someone like a Shook or Jazz Jones, or it's a pretty guard heavy roster. So I think you could get a little bit deeper in the paint, a little bit more length. I think that really impacted New York last year when Howard was out. So that would be what I would be targeting or looking to attract, obviously. But if nothing major happens with this roster, I think you've got to look at Marine and you got to look at Rebecca Allen and like, I mean, there's some question marks there. Who's coming over, who's going to be playing, but I would think that New York would find a way to keep Rebecca Allen. I mean,
You need to.
she's been
You
so
need to.
steady and consistent, and is such a key player on this roster, in my opinion, especially now with Sandy Brondello.
Oh, I agree. I mean, my thing is this. You look at this roster and you go, Natasha Howard needs help in the paint. I don't know. Hansu is a project, right? Like, I don't think she's that answer now if you want this team to seriously compete, right? Kylie Shook, I think, has the potential, but I kind of almost want to pair Natasha Howard with another big, right?
No, I
And I
agree.
don't
Yeah,
know if Shook is that big. Now I know the style we saw before was a running gun, a big who can shoot the three. So obviously, as much as it pains me to say it, Steph Dolson's a player who kind of comes to mind. A Stu is a player who kind of comes to mind. Heck, could you bring back a Tina Charles? You bring back a Tina Charles. Now I know that the split up wasn't the greatest, most
right,
amicable,
right, right, right.
happiest situation, but you bring back a Tina Charles to pair with a Natasha Howard.
Yeah,
I think now you're talking about a team that's making legitimate waves because end of the day, the way this roster is built, they need to make space for Rebecca Allen, like you said. And if Marine's coming over, you got to find a way to make space, which means cutting ties with some of these young players. But
100%.
that doesn't solve the
Yeah,
crux in my mind, which is finding that missing big piece. And the question truly becomes, can they get something for these young players because they have an abundance of wealth in that situation,
hmm
but the other teams know that. And when the other teams know what the team is trying to do, the trades aren't as easy to go by. Will it be a situation where we see them trading it during during mid free agency period, closer to the draft? I don't know, but I think it's an interesting one that if you look at this team, in my opinion, again, they're still 3 years out from being legitimate contenders unless they make a big move this year.
I agree.
And the other thing for me is like the difference between, and I apologize for mentioning Dallas so much in this episode, New York fans, but like the difference between Dallas and New York is the vets, right? Like when we did our Dallas episode, we were continuously talking about should they bring in a vet? What's the plus minus of cutting ties with these young players who have the potential, who grow year by year and grow overseas to bring in a vet? And Dallas just wasn't close enough to that championship level play from their vets from their youth that I think it makes sense for them to make that move. New York, on the other hand, because they have a Sammy and a Tasha and a Benijah, I think that's when it really starts to shift and you go, okay, we also have Sabrina. One move could really push us over the edge and put us into. I'm not saying they're a top 4 team, even if they make a big move, But a top 5, top 6 team, most definitely.
But I think that's got to be the trajectory if you're in this franchise. Like our goal, after last year and just kind of the way things panned out. Yes, some luck. Yes, we had a bad spell. We had no depth. We had no interior size. Like Howard was out. Okay, whatever. But like, if I'm New York, I'm looking at this going, we got to finish in the top 5 or 6. That's our goal. Um, and if not, I think it's a failure. I mean, that's how aggressive you got to be at this point. And so, like you said, one move, one key piece, in my opinion, it's a size, right? It could be, more of a stretch four, center, whatever, however. I think that we could have conversations about that. But yeah, you're one big move away from potentially being in those conversations, and they're right there on the cusp. But this free agency is going to be really telling, in my opinion. I just don't know what direction it's going to go, and ultimately I don't know how you get it done. I do think New York is attractive, but I mean, all the names you just mentioned make sense to me. I'd be going after him.
Right, and hey, Maisha Hines Allen also for that run and gun style
Oh my
play,
god, it'd be
a
amazing.
complete shift. Because now I'm just thinking like there's certain players like Elizabeth Williams who I've never been like the biggest fan of her game style. Maybe it was where she played, maybe it was who she was around. I know she's not the right fit for this team, but I kind of do like pairing her with a Natasha How. Like, call me old fashioned when you have a player of Natasha Howard's skill set where, yeah, she can play big, but also she can run and gun. Part of me wants to pair her with a natural big type
Mhm.
player. I don't know why I'm going on that rant right now. I mean, what do you think for this team? I mean, in your mind, who would be a home run hit?
Oh god. I mean, for the sake of just being
Anybody,
poetic, I
anybody.
mean, I like an Emma Miesemann. And again, I know there's
That would be
question marks
scary.
there. Um, I like the idea of Steph Dolson. I don't know that it's necessarily a fit. Um, honestly, I know we're probably just being crazy here, but like Tina Charles, my God, can you imagine? Like, I don't know how it didn't sound good the way it went down. So I'm sure we're just dreaming here, but this is a New York team that I would imagine if things were in a healthy spot, you would at least listen because, you know, that's kind of Natasha Howard and Tina Charles together. Yeah, that makes sense to
What about
me.
Natasha Howard, Liz Cambage together?
I
Liz
just don't,
Cambage means cutting ties to a couple young players, right? Because they got to free up some space because you're
but
still assuming you want to bring back Becca Allen.
but here's my question, with the Opals thing and Sandy Brondello and Liz Cambage, like, is that even possible? I don't know. Um,
That's a good question. And the big question, honestly, that isn't necessarily for this episode to discuss, but thinking that through, does that mean that Jonathan Cope goes into the situation of hiring the head coach and goes, I'm happy losing out on the opportunity of a Liz Cambage style talent stash player to get the coaching of a Sandy Brondello.
well,
That's the interesting part to me.
one thing you got to know about Kolb at this point is how aggressive he is willing to be. So yeah, understanding that one of the biggest free agents is available and wants to be in a major market, like, I don't know. I just don't know the behind the scenes dynamic in that situation. To me, from an outsider looking in, it doesn't seem like that would be good. But I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth. Ultimately, I don't know. But my God, yeah, Elise Cambage on this roster, I love it. I love the thought of that. If it were even possible. So yeah,
Yeah. Hey, any final thoughts for the New York Liberty? No, I mean, I just think that like it has to be discussed, right? We all
yeah,
know that Liz wants to go to a major market. New
sure.
York and LA kind of seem to be like the no brainers. But and just to play devil's advocate, I don't see anybody looking at Cheryl Reeve or Don Staley. I don't see Candace Parker looking to Cheryl Reeve or Don Staley and saying my frustration of not being on Team USA is towards the head coach, right? I don't know how it works with the Opals, but I would
Yeah.
assume that Sandy Brondello isn't the end all be all of who gets, picked
Well,
for that roster.
but Lucas, okay, so how about John Cole Jones? Now, I know, Connecticut has offered her the core, and we'll see. I think we're all just assuming she's going to return to Connecticut. I certainly believe that myself, but, you know, why not go for it or at least try? If you're New York, now I get Natasha Howard and John Cole Jones. How does that look together? I kind of like it. Why not? Um, but I'm throwing more names out there that could potentially be those high profile
But
names that get
this is
signed.
what I want to throw out there when it comes to New York. And maybe I'm reading into shaded tweets a little too much. When Natasha Howard left Seattle, right? It was very clear she could have stayed in Seattle. They probably would have run it back last year. Um, yeah, run it back. Sorry, I had to get my years in proper order. She tweeted out something to the effect of only thing left to do is win an MVP because she's won defensive player of the year. She's been a key clog. She's won multiple rings.
Mhm.
All that's left, as a bench player, as a starter, fine, whatever. All that's left is to win MVP. Now, when I see that from a player, I think that's a positive, especially when they're moving on to a new team that's kind of in a rebuild mode. They're no longer in that rebuildish mode anymore. Now they're kind of in a
Middle of the pack.
retool mode.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So for me, it's like it. You know, if I'm playing to our team's egos, I don't want to shadow Natasha Howard with a big name signing. A Tina Charles type player, like, is not winning another MVP in this league realistically with this team, right? As
Well, and that
harsh
and
as
that
that might sound.
Sure, but that also, that just brings we just have too big of a question mark. Like, what can Natasha Howard be for the New York Liberty? We still don't know. We really
True.
didn't get the chance to see that. So, that's tough for us to assess and determine. Like, what are some pieces you put around her? But I don't know. It's interesting, but I think that I'm excited for New York. This is a little more exciting to me than Dallas, or I mean, honestly, it's kind of on the scale of like Las Vegas, because I see the potential in these rosters, and I think New York could take a big time jump. But yeah, they're going to end up having to cut ties with a couple players here that are just bogging down this roster, and I think they'll maybe try to attract size, a vet, a nice core piece that makes sense and kind of solidifies their core group, or right their starting six rotation. But yeah, I don't know. This is a good one. New York's going to be one of those teams that has the most eyes on them this free agency, in my opinion.
And that's it for this episode.